It is a privilege for me to welcome you all once again on behalf of Bar Association of Maharera and Maharera Appellate Tribunal, along with Pune Rera Practitioners Association. Our today's topic is intellectual property rights. In our modern world, intellectual property enhances every aspect of our lives. Every day, we come in contact with products that have protected intellectual property. So, it is one of the key drivers of the world today. This implies that every advocate needs to understand the importance of intellectual property rights. So, today, to guide us through the importance of intellectual property rights, we have a prominent speaker, Advocate Nishad Nadkarni. I will now hand over to Advocate Tanuj Lodha to formally introduce the speaker. Over to you, Tanuj.
Thank you, Chetan. Good afternoon, all. I once again welcome you all on behalf of Bar Association of Maharera and Maharet, as along with Rera Practitioner Association Pune. As Chetan said, in this world of increasing commercial litigations, IP holds a very important, intellectual property holds a very important place. And today's speaker, Advocate Nishad Nadkarni, is an authority on the same. It is my privilege to introduce him. Advocate Nishad Nadkarni is a partner with Khetan and Company. Nishad has been practicing in intellectual property practice group in the Mumbai office. Nishad specializes in various aspects of IP law as well as commercial litigation and arbitration. Nishad has about 20 years of experience across industries on diverse areas of intellectual property, including advisory, transactions, prosecution, and litigation pertaining to trademarks, copyrights, design, patent, biodiversity, etc. Nishad has represented in several important matters. He has dealt with registrability, protection, exploitation of trademarks. He has advised important corporates, some of the biggest corporates like Hindustan Unilever, Godrej Consumer, Marico, L'Oreal, before various authorities and tribunals. Nishad is also has dealt in media and entertainment, film, television production houses for drafting, negotiating film contracts, etc. He has been dealing with commercial litigation and arbitration. On the education side, Nishad is LLB from the University of Pune from the batch of 1999, and he has done his LLM in Commercial Laws, University of Mumbai 2001. Nishad also holds a diploma in Consumer Protection Laws, ILS Pune in 1998, and has a master's diploma in Software Sciences. Once again, with the privilege of introducing today's speaker, who is an authority on the subject, it's over to Advocate Nishad Nadkarni. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanuj, for a very generous introduction. I hope my voice is very clear. Am I audible? Right. Very good day to all of you, and thank you for taking the time out to attend this session. Big thank you to the association for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to kind of talk to all of you. I have a presentation which I will just share with you, and then let's get started with the session today. Is the presentation visible?
Yes, yes, it's visible. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So, as I said, the session is really going to be an introduction to intellectual property. Intellectual property is a very vast subject, and given the time that we have, which is just about an hour and a half to an hour maybe, it's been a task for me to really kind of push into this presentation as much as I could and kind of introduce you to the aspects of intellectual property. The session I have divided into a few parts. I will introduce you to the concept of intellectual property to start with. I'll then introduce you to the various forms of intellectual property. Then I'll delve into certain depth with regard to what these intellectual properties are. Then quickly address you on what the registration process is, how IP is commercialized, and then of course the last part would be relating to litigation and enforcement of intellectual property. Now, very often, various forms of intellectual property are referred to by us, even in general conversation, like ये तो उसका trademark dialogue है, ये dialogue मत बोलना, उसका patent है, So these terms are used very, very loosely, and more often than not, this usage is not exactly the form of intellectual property that we refer to it as. So with that, what is intellectual property? So intellectual property is an intangible property, unlike our real estate, which is tangible property. It is a commercially valuable product of the human intellect. So it is created by the human mind. Okay, and what is the protection and what is the value that it brings to you? So the law gives you certain exclusive rights to use and exploit the intellectual property that you have created. Okay, so these rights which are accorded to you by law are really called the intellectual property rights. As I said, I'm going to be taking you through the life cycle of intellectual property, of the most important intellectual properties that we come across during the course of our regular dealings. So I will start with the conception, the preparation of intellectual property, which is firstly formulation, creating and crystallizing the actual work. Then how is it protected? How does it vest in a particular person? How do you enforce it if it is violated by anyone else? If you are not the first owner or the creator, then you can also invest in and acquire intellectual property belonging to others and then exploit it further. And then, of course, if it is your intellectual property, you can commercialize it through various ways and means. So I'll get into each of these during the course of the presentation. Now, there are various forms of intellectual properties, and the predominant ones which we come across in our regular day are trademarks, copyrights, patents, which are in relation to patentable inventions, designs, and geographical indications. Each of these have a statutory protection, and the various statutes are set out on the right-hand side. There are two more forms which are relatively new, which are the semiconductor chip layout, which is for the chip layout of various electronic products that we come across on a day-to-day basis. And then there are plant varieties, which are various types of or variants of, say, potatoes, brinjals, etc. So which are created by breeders, farmers, etc. So for that, there is two new forms of intellectual property. And I'm not going to be dealing with these in as much detail because there's not so much happening in those fields as of now. And the last part, which is not protected by any statute today, is confidential information, know-how, and trade secrets. These terms more or less mean the same thing, but they are not presently protected by statute. And more often than not, the protection is purely contractual. I will deal with each of these separately, and as we go along, I think there'll be much more clarity about, what is a trademark, what is a copyright, what is a patent, etc. So let's start first with the trademarks. Now, what is a trademark? As the name suggests, it is a mark which relates to your trade. Now, a mark can be anything. It can be a device, it can be a heading, it can be a ticket, it can be a name, a word, letter, numeral, shape of the goods, even smell is nowadays protected. And it can be a combination of any of these, okay? But is any mark capable of being a trademark? The answer is no. For using any mark as a trademark, it has to be capable of distinguishing the goods of one person from those of another. It should indicate a connection in the course of trade. And lastly, and most importantly, it should be capable of being graphically represented. Now, what do I mean by all of this? In lay terms, a mark which indicates to a consumer that a product is originating from a particular source or a manufacturer is a trademark. So as a consumer, the trademark identifies to the consumer that the product is originating from a particular source. So that is the trade connection that it should show. And secondly, it should be capable of being graphically represented so that people can identify it and recognize it because they can see it. I told you that there are various types of marks, and let's now get to the examples of what these marks are. So conventionally what happens is word marks and label marks are the most prominently used marks. So Tata would be the most famous example of a word mark, whereas the logo on top would be the device mark. Similarly, for Nike, just the swoosh is a device mark. Nike is the word mark. Just do it, which is a slogan, is a combination of various words. And this logo taken as a whole is a combination of various marks taken together to form one mark. Okay. Similarly, the packaging of a particular product is also a trademark. Now, what are non-conventional marks? So we saw that colors are also capable of being used as trademarks. One or two very famous examples are the John Deere tractors, which use the color combination of green and yellow. So the color green and yellow, when used in respect of tractors, is identified as a tractor which has been manufactured and sold by the company John Deere. One very famous litigation in the recent past was with regard to the sole of a shoe, which is red in color, which is Christian Louboutin. So it is pretty popularly known that if a luxurious shoe has a red sole, then probably it has been manufactured and designed by Christian Louboutin. Similarly, signature marks or names of personalities. Katrina Kaif has kind of a joint venture with Nykaa. It's called Nykaa KK Beauty. So the product has a KK on it. Similarly, various celebrities have come up with various products which use their signature on it. I remember I used to have an LG phone, which used to have an Amitabh Bachchan signature endorsed on it. So those are signature marks. Sounds are also registered as trademarks. The first sound mark in India was the yodeling voice of the Yahoo mark. One thing which would interest a lot of guys would be that the Enfield thump, the iconic sound of the Enfield motorcycle, that is also now registered as a trademark. As I had indicated, you must graphically indicate the trademark, and therefore this here which I have shown is very important because the musical notations of the sound mark are required to be given at the time that you seek the registration of the mark. Okay. The last one is scent and taste. These have been given registration in various countries across the world. Not very common in the Indian context, at least I'm not aware of a scent mark registered in India as of now. But from my research, it appears that the first scent mark was for rose-scented tires of vehicles which were manufactured by Sumitomo Rubber. Now, the difficulty which arises in registering the scent mark in India is that there is no particular way of graphically representing each and every scent. So one way of probably doing it is giving a chemical formulation of the product that you are wanting a scent registration in respect of, but not really tested in that context. I had the roar of the MGM lion, which is a very common example, which is taken for sound marks, which I'm told is a registered mark as well. I'm not very sure whether that sound was audible, but I'm sure all of you really know of that sound. Now, when you're looking at registration of a trademark, what is it that cannot be registered as a trademark is also set out in the statute. And therefore, you must remember that the function of a trademark is to distinguish one manufacturer from another manufacturer. So if it is descriptive in nature, it is not capable of identifying one product as originating from one source. So if you are going to be registering car in respect of cars or apples in respect of apples, you cannot register that as a trademark. However, Apple for a phone is not descriptive of a phone, and therefore you are able to register it as a trademark. Generic marks, which are commonly used in the course of a particular industry, are not capable of being used as trademarks. Marks which are capable of hurting religious susceptibilities, Ganesh for sandals, not possible. Scandalous obscene materials, FC UK, very debatable whether you can register that as a trademark. Those shapes are registrable as trademarks if the shape has something to do with the functionality of the product, which means that the product must have that shape so as to function in a particular manner. Then again, it becomes generic to that product and therefore it is not registrable. Similarly, there is a list of chemical names and international non-proprietary names which cannot be registered as trademarks. Some more examples are like descriptive terms like perfection for goods, aqua for water, trim for fingernail clippers, or litter basket for dustbins cannot be registered. Now, what is the scope of the protection of a trademark? So a trademark can be giving you protection in respect of particular classes. And what do I mean by this? The goods and services across which are available are classified under the statute into various classes depending upon similarity of the products. So for example, apparel, clothes, hats, socks, they are all classified in one class, which is class 25. Pharmaceuticals, which is medicines, are classified under class 5. Cosmetic products, soaps, detergents, classified in class 3. So there are 34 classes in which all types of goods which are available in the world are classified. And then there are services also, like the legal industry, which is our industry. So all these services are classified under class 35 to 45. So depending upon the nature of the business that you are carrying on, you have to identify the classes in which you will have to seek your registration. That does not mean that you are limited to only one class. One classic example is Reliance or Tata for that matter, which carry on businesses in various diverse categories. So they will seek a registration for their mark in all those classes where their products or services lie. Okay, be it software engineering, be it steel, be it groceries, be it retailing, whatever that may be. Now, certain points to remember when you're talking about trademark. Registration is not mandatory in respect of trademarks. So the moment you start using a particular mark in respect of your products, you acquire rights in respect of the mark. Registration is not mandatory. However, use of the mark and continued extensive uninterrupted use is very important. Why do I say so? Because at the end of the day, it is about the consumer recognizing a particular product. What do I mean by that? The mark has gained reputation for you and thus identifies to a consumer that the product comes from you. And you will be aggrieved or upset only if someone tries to use that reputation for his own benefit. That means I have started using Reliance as a mark. I have developed the reputation by virtue of use so that the consumer knows that any Reliance product comes from me and is a guarantee of quality of that product. And if you try to use Reliance for the same product and try to ride on my reputation, I'll have a problem. But to show that reputation, my use is very important. It is not necessary that you use the mark only within the territory of India, but even if you are manufacturing the product in India and exporting the product outside of India, that is sufficient to constitute use. The second thing is, when you have composite marks, like I had shown Reliance, for example, then in such marks, if Tata is used as a part of the entire mark, that also is sufficient. So you don't have to independently use the mark. It can be a part of a composite mark. The next thing is, when you are seeking registration and you are seeking registration of a composite mark, it is essential to understand that the protection given by the statute is to the mark as a whole. So if you have various elements, all of which are important to you, like for example, Nike, the swoosh mark, both used together is the composite mark, then you should apply for registration for all three, the swoosh alone, the composite mark, and just Nike. Okay, so section 17 therefore is very important. If you register a composite mark, then the statutory protection is not available to individual components of the mark, though you may have a right in passing off or the common law right. The next common mistake which people do, or common thing that people ask, is when is it okay to use a TM, when is it okay to use an R? So it is desirable to use the TM immediately upon commencing the use of the mark. Why? Because it is notice to the public that you are using it as a trademark and that no one else should be copying that mark for their own goods, so that there should be no consumer confusion. There should be no misuse of your mark. So a TM you can start immediately. Insofar as the R is concerned, you can use the R only once the mark is registered. Otherwise you cannot use it. It is considered an offense. What is the scope of protection under the statute? The protection pursuant to a registration or protection under the statute is limited to the territory of India. However, under common law, there is a protection to a mark which is used across the world also. In India, if you are in a position to demonstrate that significant amount of reputation has come into India. How can that be so? There are people who travel outside of India. They attend various seminars maybe where these products are advertised. You may go there and purchase those products, bring those back into India, and your circle gets to know of those products. Or they may just have been advertised in India. With the advent of the internet, you may have had access to that product on a significant basis. So that is the aspect of transporter reputation. What is the term of a registration? The term of the registration is 10 years, and it can be renewed in perpetuity for further periods of 10 years. So the moment your first 10-year period comes to an end or is coming to an end, 6 months prior to that, you can seek a renewal and you get a renewal for 10 more years. As I said in the beginning, registration is not mandatory, but definitely desirable, because you can then sue for registration, for infringement. And one significant advantage of registration is that if you are suing for infringement, unlike the normal principle of CPC, that you have to sue where the cause of action arises or where the defendant carries on or resides business, in a trademark infringement proceeding, you can initiate action where the plaintiff resides or carries on business. So that's an advantage of registration that you must bear in mind. Now let's move on to the second aspect of intellectual property rights, which is copyrights. Before I move on to this, let me just also bring to your notice that there is a significant amount of overlap between the various forms of intellectual property, which is trademarks, copyrights, designs, and that will also be touched upon during the course of this presentation, as you will see. And a particular single product may have several intellectual properties applied to it. I will demonstrate that as we go towards the end of the presentation. Now, what is a copyright? So copyright subsists in works, and the statute talks about 6 kind of basic works. For 4 of them, it also talks about originality, and for 2 of them, the threshold of originality, if I may say so, is slightly lesser. Copyright does not subsist in merely an idea, but it has to be fixed in an expression. And I will indicate to you what I mean by that. Let's first deal with what are the kinds of works. So there are artistic works, there are dramatic works, there are literary works, then there are musical works. These are the 4 basic forms or works in which copyrights subsist. And then there are sound recordings and cinematograph films, which are composite works. And I'll explain what I mean by this in a moment. So let's quickly get into slight details of what do we mean by literary work, what do we mean by other forms of works. So a literary work is anything which is written like a book. It's an inclusive definition and includes computer programs also. So if you're doing a script coding, that computer program will also constitute literary work. Your artistic work includes any paintings, sculptures, drawings, maps, plans, charts, even photographs. And any other work of artistic craftsmanship. What do I mean by that? Even if I sit down just now and start scribbling and drawing something which is completely abstract, it may constitute artistic work. So when we talk about original work that we were talking about over here, it does not mean that it has to be novel. It also does not mean that it has to have artistic quality. It only means that there has to be some amount of effort which has to be put in and some amount of creativity. The threshold of creativity in India is not very high, unlike in certain other jurisdictions where a good amount of skill labor has to be put in to get a copyright. That's not the case in the Indian scenario. Coming to musical works, any tune or melody, not a song mind you, the tune or the melody which is comprised in the song is the musical work. So your graphical notations, which we were talking about earlier in the trademark context also, those are the tune. Okay. A dramatic work is any script, for that matter, any choreographic work for a dance, all of those, they're a subset of literary works, really speaking, but they are performable literary works, if I may call them that. And then sound recordings and cinematograph films. I told you these are composite works. What do I mean by composite works? So a sound recording is made by singing the lyrics, which are the words which I have written, which is a literary work, singing it along with a tune which is performed, which is the musical work. It incorporates a performance of an artist who is actually singing it. So a sound recording is a recording of sounds from which sounds may be produced regardless of medium. But these sounds are produced by using the literary work and the musical work and performing them. Okay. Similarly, for a cinematograph film, it's even more complex. You are performing the literary work. You have artistic works which probably form your background. You have musical works which are in the sound, in the songs. You have artists or performers, which are actors who are performing. All of this taken together and creating a visual recording on any medium is your cinematograph film. The rights in a cinematograph film are independent of the ingredients which go into the cinematograph film. So to give you another example of this, what we were discussing just prior to the presentation starting, what I'm doing just now, this live presentation, which will be recorded in the form of a cinematograph film later, what I'm doing is a performance, and the screen that you are seeing is my literary work. And the literary work has certain artistic works also. Okay. So therefore, it is a composite work. There are two other rights which are regarded as neighboring rights. I'm not going to be getting into too much details of these, but these are rights also which are guaranteed by the Copyright Act. They are called the performers' rights. So performers are all these artists, performers like actors, singers, even mimicry artists, miming artists. All of those have rights in their performances. So any recording of their performance, they may be in a position to object or allow the recording thereof, and then they have rights in that performance. Similarly, broadcasting organizations with broadcast particular programs or certain works, they have, or live events for that matter, they have rights in those events, and which would be the broadcast. The next aspect which is very important in a copyright scenario is the moral right, which is also known as the special right. This moral right is available only to the author of a work. Who is an author? An author is the creator of the work. What are these moral rights? There are two moral rights. The first one is to be identified as the father of the creation, which is the paternal right. So no one else can claim that something which is being created by me is created by him. Very often happens in the music industry, in the film industry. I have written a script, someone else takes credit for it. My author's moral right, my right to claim the authorship is being violated. And the second one is also very commonly seen in the film industry, is the right to claim damages or restrain any person from distorting, mutilating, or modifying or doing any other act with my work which will prejudice my honor or reputation. So if I have done a nice drawing of a particular person and I see that someone else has given it an obscene connotation, for example, and is projecting it as my work going forward, that is going to be prejudicial to my honor and reputation. So mere distortion, mutilation, or modification may not necessarily violate a moral right. It may be a violation of a copyright. But to violate my moral right, it has to be prejudicial to my honor and reputation as well. The second thing that you must remember in the context of moral rights is, even after assignment of my copyright, so I've created a film. Let's talk about a tune. That may be a simpler example. I've created a tune. I sell the tune to a music company, which will create a song out of it. Even after the transfer of the work to the music company, I will continue to have the right to be claimed as the author of the work. I will have the right to stop anyone from mutilating or distorting that tune if I believe and am in a position to demonstrate that such modification will be prejudicial to my honor or my reputation. Okay. What are the rights which are available to copyright owners? So copyrights are very peculiar, and they are known as a bundle of rights. And each of these rights can independently subsist. So what do I mean by independently subsist? So when you're talking about a literary work, you have the right to reproduce the work, which is pick that work and make another work using the same work. So I'm reproducing that work. To issue copies, so I make a book, I write a book, I issue copies of that to the public, I make copies and publish that. I can read the book to the public, which is communicating it to the public or performing it in the public. Convert that work into a cinematograph film by converting into a script, screenplay, etc. Translate it, adapt it. Now, therefore, each of these constitute a right within the bundle of rights. Okay. And each of these can be independently exploited. So thereby, I can sell just one right. So I can give the right to reproduce the work to X. I can give the right to make a cinematograph film out of my book to Y. I can give the right to create a translation of the book and sell only the translation of the book to another. Okay. So copyrights are a bundle of rights, each of which can be exploited independently. Just quickly, since I made a reference to authorship and ownership is not the same. An author is always the creator of the work. So in the respect of a musical work, it is the composer. For an photograph, it's the photographer. For an artistic work, it's an artist. For a film and a sound recording, it's the producer, the person who invests the money and is responsible for the creation of the entire work. The author of the work, which is the creator of the work, is normally the first owner of the work. However, if the author of the work is an employee of an employer and creates it in the course of employment, then the first owner will be the employer. So in such a case, the author will not be the first owner. Now, you all may have heard about the concept of work for hire, which means that if I have hired you to do something, then I will have the rights to own whatever you have created for me. That concept is not so strongly existent under the Indian law. That is limited to only certain works, which are photographs, paintings, portraits, engravings, and cinematograph film. So if I engage you to make a portrait of me, a painting, take a photograph, or make a film for me, then I will own those copyrights. But other than that, if I hire you for creating any other work, then it is essential that in the agreement of hiring, I must mention that there will be an assignment of those rights which will be created by you into me. Just like trademarks, copyright registration is not mandatory. Registration will not really give you a higher right, except for the fact that it is a prima facie evidence of the fact that you are the owner of the work. Unlike other forms of intellectual property, copyrights have an extraterritorial application through treaties to which other countries are parties to. So we are a party to the Berne Convention and the Universal Copyright Convention. So all countries which are parties to this convention will be entitled to claim protection of works created in those countries in our country as per the provisions of the Copyright Act. Okay. The term of a copyright, irrespective of the registration, is always the life of the author and 60 years after the death of the author. So if I die today, then 60 years from the next year, starting from January, that will be the life of the copyright. Of course, you can relinquish the right of copyrights and then the work goes into the public domain. I'm not getting into those details too much, but remember that moral rights cannot be assigned nor relinquished. There is a slight debate there as to relinquishment, but the normal prevalent view seems to be that you cannot give up moral rights. Insofar as broadcasts and performers' rights, they are for 25 years and 50 years each, beginning from the date on which the broadcast is made or the performance is made. I've already got into the details of the bundle of exclusive rights, and therefore I'm not getting into that again. Now coming to the overlap that I was talking to you about a little while back, and I did give you an indication of that. So trademarks and copyrights can subsist in a single work simultaneously. They can independently coexist and can be independently enforced. So when you're talking about, say, the Nokia ringtone, which is very famous, ting, 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 ting. So that tune is really a musical work. That musical work, when used in the course of trade to identify that the product, which is the phone, originates from the Nokia Corporation, becomes a trademark. So two rights subsist in that work. One is a musical work copyright, and the other is used as a trademark. Similarly, when you're talking about artistic works, I can draw a caricature today, a cartoon. It will be an artistic work in which copyright subsists. I can adopt that as a trademark and start using it as a trademark as well. Once the consumers associate that caricature with my products, it will have assumed the significance of a trademark as well. There is also overlap between designs and copyrights. I will come to designs in a bit, but I will just put forth this concept to you. Designs are the look and feel of a particular product, and very often a particular artistic work may be applied to a particular product. Now, once it is applied to a particular product in a particular form, and it is reproduced by an industrial process for 50 times, you cannot claim copyrights in that work which is applied to the product anymore. So you may have a copyright in this character continuing, but to the extent that it is applied to a particular product and reproduced by an industrial process 50 times, you will not be able to claim copyright protection by virtue of section 15(2). It's slightly complex, but it has been raised in various matters in the past. And to give you an example, there are various patterns that are drawn. These patterns are drawn by fashion designers. The moment that pattern is drawn, it's an artistic work. The moment that is applied to a particular clothing as a design on the clothing, that copyright will subsist only till such time that you are not selling that commercially and you not exceeded 50 products. Okay. There was a very famous case of Ritu Kumar on this aspect. Let's quickly now touch upon what is a patent. So trademarks identify the source of a product. Copyrights are any creation of the intellectual mind, which is a drawing, writing, musical work. So there's no application necessary for that. But when you're talking about patents, they're applied in relation to a product or a process or method of creation of a product. Now, what is patentable? Any invention. So by invention, it has to be novel, it has to be new. It should not be obvious to a person skilled in the art. So if it's an engineering or electrical product, it should not be obvious as per normal principles to an electrical engineer कि हाँ ऐसा करेंगे तो ये तो बन ही जाएगा. Okay. And lastly, it must necessarily have utility or usefulness, industrial applicability. So merely because I create a new product with an inventive step which is not obvious is not sufficient. It should be of use as well. Now, patents subsist in works which satisfy these three criteria. Similarly, the statute also prescribes certain things which cannot be patentable, and that has been a subject matter of a good amount of discussion for a long period of time, which is section 3. Now that talks about a mere discovery cannot be protected, a mere admixture cannot be protected, animals, plants, varieties of those cannot be protected as patents. Topography of integrated circuits falls within the domain of another statute. If it is contrary to public policy, morality, not protectable. Now, two important things which arise from this are protection for business methods and protection for computer programs, which are the most relevant in the context of regular business. Computer programs by themselves are not protectable under patents. They have to be coupled with some kind of a hardware so as to be patentable. There has been a flip-flop about this, and the present position seems to be that so long as a computer program is shown to be capable of working along with a hardware, it may be patentable. The second aspect that I spoke of was a business method. What is a business method? And I will give you an example of a business method and how we came about a workaround in respect of the same in one of our matters. So a business method means any manner of conducting a business. So if I have a concept which I have created, a new kind of a business which I have created, a new business model which I have created, is it patentable? It is not. How do you protect it? How can you stop some competitor getting into that business? So one way of doing it, and not the best way of doing it, but the only way of doing it, if I may say so, is protecting it as a literary work. So you set out the exact manner of conducting the particular business and then try to protect it. Not all business methods are protectable, and I'll give you an example. So one mutual funds company wanted to increase its business, and therefore they created a competition whereby traders would trade on a particular platform. That platform would be the mutual fund platform of the entity. And then based on who's made maximum amount of money, etc., there was an algorithm to it. There were various other aspects which were very uniquely constructed. They would choose a winner at the end of it and they would pay him some money. In that process, what used to happen is there used to be various people who used to open accounts on that mutual fund platform, and then they used to derive their commissions and all of that also out of it. Now, another entity copied this exact method of advertising and they launched a similar competition. The question was, how do you protect a business method? Because there is no statutory protection per se for a business method. Now, we had already advised the client to ensure that this entire competition, the manner in which it will be conducted, evaluated, all of this you put it down in writing. Take screenshots of each and every graphic user interface of the screen and create a complete Bible, which was your literary work. As luck would have it, the terms and conditions were copied by this other gentleman. And then we created a case not only on the basis of the literary work, but also on the basis of the common law remedy of passing off, saying that this business model of mine is representative of my business to the consumer. And this competition is known as originating from me for my business. And therefore, anyone else conducting a similar competition would not only be a violation of my literary work, but also would give the user of a mutual fund platform the impression that this platform belongs to me. So therefore, I thought, let me just quickly stress on this aspect and give you an example. Certain points to remember in the context of patents. So the most important thing is patents do not exist independent of a registration. So if you don't have a registration for a patent for your product or your process, then there is no enforcement of that. You cannot claim exclusive rights like you can for trademarks or copyrights, where registration is not mandatory. Here, registration is mandatory. The second thing is you must maintain that it is novel, which is new, prior to the date of the application. And therefore, it is important that you maintain confidentiality with regard to your patented products. Before you launch it, you apply for the grant of a patent. I'm sorry, there is a typographical error here. This should have been patents. It's similar for designs as well. Okay. The scope of protection is only the territory of India, and the exclusive rights that you get is only for 20 years. Now, in the context of the scope of protection, there was a very recent case, and therefore I must kind of bring this to your notice, especially in the context of foreign clients, for example. The protection in respect of patents is territorial. So if you get a grant of a patent in India, you cannot enforce that patent in USA or Singapore or China. You have to apply for a patent in that country separately. Similarly, if you have a patent registration or a grant in the USA, you cannot seek protection in India without having a patent grant in India. There was a very recent case before the Delhi High Court where one such entity sought to protect or enforce its rights in a technology which was patented in the US, but not patented in India. They sought to protect that and enforce that as technology or confidential information or technical information. The question was, can you do that? The answer was no. Why? Because your patent was not registered in India. It was no longer confidential because you had disclosed it to the public, by way of making a patent application in the US. So once you make the patent application, you are in fact disclosing it to the patent office. Once it is published, it becomes available to the public and therefore comes into the public domain. And therefore it is very important that you retain absolute confidentiality prior to commercialization and make sure that you apply for a grant of a patent in each jurisdiction where you want to exploit and market and manufacture that particular product or the process. Let's now come to the designs. As I said, designs are only the visual aesthetic appeal of a particular product. It is a feature of either the shape, configuration, pattern, ornament, composition of lines or colors. So it is only the visual appeal of a product which can be protected by designs. Very common examples are the Crocs shoes or the chappals that we use. The design of the Vespa scooter, it looks like a particular manner and therefore the consumer is drawn to buy it. More practical examples, we've all been in school. We have children who are in school. The water bottle is a very prized possession. And the child will purchase a particular water bottle because it looks nice. His peers will say, "Arey bhai, bahut acha water bottle hai, kahan se laya?" Right? So it is the appeal to the eye which is important. So any new original design is protectable. Just like patents, registration is mandatory. Without a registration, you cannot seek design protection. The second aspect is that the visual part of the product should not be driven by the functional aspect of the product. So if a product needs to look like that because the shape of the product defines the manner in which the product will function, then that design may not be registrable because it is a functional design. It's not only for visual appeal. The second thing is, because we saw that shapes can be registered as trademarks, and therefore artistic work which is also a shape can also be designed as can be registered as a design. If you are claiming trademark rights in a particular shape, or if you are claiming copyrights in a particular shape, you cannot seek registration as a design. The other way around has not been tested. So what is the context of this? A design registration is only for 15 years. So after the design registration is over, can you then claim trademark rights or copyrights? Often the question which arises is also, should I claim trademark rights or should I claim design rights? Now, the shape of this Croc sandal is known to associate from that company. So this shape itself will also function as a trademark. The shape has a visual appeal and therefore there will also be a design, right? Which one do you claim? So this is a question which often arises as a question from a client. The answer is not always very simple. The answer would really depend upon what is the life of the product. If the life of the product is not significant, then you may very well go for a design right. If the life of the product is going to be very significant, you may want to register the shape as a trademark and not as a design. But make sure that once you apply it as a trademark, you don't again go and apply it as a design mark. Then your rights are going to be in jeopardy. If it is not new and original, then it's not registrable as a design. If it has been disclosed to the public anywhere, it is not registrable. So again, confidentiality is the key prior to you commercializing your design. As I said, the term of a design registration is 10 years and can be extended by further 5 years. Again, the scope of territory or scope of protection of a design right is also only for India. So if you have a design registered outside of India, you can't enforce it in India. Similarly, if you have a registration in India, you can't enforce it outside of India. Now, as I had said, a single product can have various intellectual properties assigned to it. And in this camera, therefore, you will see that Nikon is the trademark. There could be a design in respect of the look of this camera. So I may buy a Nikon camera as opposed to a Canon camera because I like the look of this. This is more visually appealing. A patent may be taken in respect of the functional aspect of, say, the lens, or even the functional aspect of what resides within this product, or the manufacturing process with regard to this product, if it is new, non-obvious. The technical drawings in respect of this camera would be artistic works and subject to 15(2), etc. that I was talking about. These copyrights would also subsist. So therefore, you've seen how various intellectual property rights or the basic intellectual property rights that we spoke of can be applied to a particular product. Now, quickly dealing with some other forms of intellectual property. One which is very commonly spoken of is a geographical indication. A geographical indication is different from trademarks, but conceptually there is a bit of an overlap. A geographical indication indicates that particular goods, which may be either agricultural goods, natural goods, or even manufactured goods, are originating from a particular territory and therefore are specific to the territory by virtue of the quality of that particular product or the reputation that the product has derived over a particular period of time and is attributable to that particular territory. One very common example is champagne, which is really sparkling wine, which originates from the district of Champagne from France. Indian examples, the first registration of a geographical indication was given to Darjeeling tea in India. Tea of a particular flavor which can be grown only in Darjeeling and is known because it is grown only there. Chappals, leather chappals made in Kolhapur, Kolhapuri chappals. Rasagullas, very famous Bengali dish, attributable only to Bengal. Pune, where I've grown up and completed my education, the Puneri Pagadi. So these are examples of geographical indications. Who can apply for a geographical indication? It can be any association of persons or association of producers or organization which is interested in the protection of and has an interest in that geographical area and that product which has been manufactured. So all manufacturers of wine or sparkling wine in the industry, in the registration of the geographical indication, champagne. Now, geographical indications are also territorial in nature. So you must seek registration in each country where you want a protection. And therefore, you would be familiar with the dispute that had arisen with regard to haldi, for example. The next one which I was touching upon was confidential information and trade secrets. Very quickly, confidential information and trade secrets, as the name indicates, are properties which are proprietary in nature, bring value to the business. They must be retained as confidential information, thereby meaning they should not have been disclosed and put into the public domain. In the event that you are disclosing it to any third party, you must enter into a contract whereby the person to whom such information is imparted is also obligated to retain confidentiality. And that obligation should be such that if there is an unauthorized use of this information by the party to whom it has been communicated, it would violate the secrecy and the confidentiality of that product or the process. It's normally technology. It could be your business data also, for all you know. One very common example which is being taken is the recipe of Coca-Cola is a trade secret, and that is not being disclosed to anyone except for the employees. That also under strict terms of confidentiality. Now that I've introduced you all to the various forms of intellectual property, indicated to you that where registration is mandatory, where registration is not mandatory, I'll quickly run you through what is the registration process. The registration process involves the first step, which is conducting a search. Normally when you're looking at trademarks, when you're adopting a new trademark, when you have invented something, or when you want to adopt a particular design, for trademarks, patents and designs, it's always good to carry out a search in the register to identify if someone else is already using it, in which case you may be infringing upon their rights, or because it's already in the knowledge of the public, it is not patentable or registrable as a design. So it is recommended to conduct a search. Then you make an application for registration. When it comes to patents, you are required to draft the complete specifications, which means you have to describe the complete patent and more particularly describe the claims. The claims govern your exclusive rights or limit your exclusive rights. Then there is the process of examination and publication. For your trademarks, the trademark office will examine it. It will examine it on two parameters. One, whether it is inherently registrable, means you are not applying for car in respect of car, apples in respect of apples. And secondly, to see if there is anyone else who's already using it for the goods in respect of which you are seeking a registration. If you pass the test of examination, it goes to publication. In patent, it happens opposite. It is published first, then examined. You have the ability to oppose a trademark and a patent once it is published. In designs and copyrights, the opposition process is not there. If there is no opposition by any third party, then the registration will be granted. Post-registration, it is always open to a cancellation proceeding. So I have not come across the publication of someone's application. I come to know of it later because he's trying to sue me. I can seek a cancellation on various grounds. Like, for example, it is descriptive, it is common to the trade in respect of trademarks, in respect of patents, it was already known, etc. Some points to remember in the context of intellectual property registrations. It is always important to identify who will own and hold the intellectual property. What do I mean by this? Tata, Reliance, they have various companies, all of them using Tata. Who will own the trademark? So you can have one single entity which is incorporated only for holding the trademarks, and then it licenses the use of the trademark to everyone else. Where there's a joint venture, me and someone else are coming together, Maruti Suzuki. Do you apply for registration of Maruti Suzuki? Answer is no. I own Maruti, you own Suzuki. We come together, get into an agreement and use it together, but don't register it. So these are important aspects that you must keep in mind when you decide who will own your intellectual property. While you are registering trademarks, one concept is that where there are two similar marks, when I'm talking about Tata, the Tata logo with Tata, and the composite mark. These are marks which have similar elements. So the trademark registry may impose a condition that these registrations will be associated. What do you mean by association? You cannot then transfer one mark without the other. So that entire bundle has to go together. So if I am selling my marks, all of them will have to go together. So you should be always conscious and see whether any marks of yours are being associated with each other when you are selling those marks. There may be conditions or limitations. So when you are doing a Surf Excel ka label registration, there may be descriptive material which is written there. The registry may impose conditions or limitations saying that you will not get exclusive rights in saying sabun at the bottom because it is descriptive. So the entire label is registered, but there will be conditions on certain descriptive matter. When you're making applications for trademarks, if you have already been using the mark but have not applied for registration and now want to register it, then it is always important that you mention since when you already been using the mark in the application. Make that user claim and ensure that you have data to prove that user claim. It's very crucial even at the time of your enforcement. When you're talking about copyrights, I indicated to you about the work for hire concept not being so prominent in India. And therefore, if you have acquired rights from an author, ensure that you have your documentation, you have an agreement which talks about an assignment. Important to get an NOC also from the trademark registry when an artistic work is capable of being used as a trademark. So as I indicated to you, images can be used as trademarks. If you want to seek registration as a copyright for that image, which is capable of being used as a trademark, then you must seek an NOC from the registry, which is the trademark registry, before you apply for a copyright registration. Insofar as patents, things to remember, if you are an Indian, you must make the patent application in India first and not outside of India. If you want to file outside directly, you must seek the permission of the controller before you make that application. Similarly, if you are making applications abroad or if you have made applications abroad, you must make a filing before the patent office disclosing where all you made applications for patent registration. Once the patent is granted, it is desirable and essential to file an annual statement of working to show that you are in fact utilizing the exclusive right which is being granted to you. In respect of each of these intellectual properties, there has been jurisprudence which has developed, whereby if you have merely sought a registration and you have not exploited it, then these registered rights become open to challenge in some manner or form, or become open to a compulsory license, which means you may be forced to allow people to utilize such works, or you may be stripped of the rights which you have claimed. Now that we have come to know what are the forms of intellectual property, how can you seek registration, let's move on to commercialization very quickly. So commercialization means that once you've been provided exclusive rights, why are you provided exclusive rights? Because you invested some amount of labor, skill, effort in creation of it. So commercialization is really bearing the fruits of the intellectual property which you created. So you can either exploit it yourself, so you can manufacture and sell your product yourself. You can sell the product to someone else. WhatsApp as an application was created by an individual. He sold it as a whole to Facebook and made money out of it. So his intellectual property has been transferred, the trademark, the entire software application, all of it is gone. Licensing is of varied forms. In a joint venture, I may just license the name of Tata. So Tata XYZ for a particular business. Franchising, I have created, say, Krish as a character. I permit merchandising for the same, which is Krish shaped dolls I can sell, Krish keychains I can sell, erasers I can sell, maybe sharpeners I can sell. That is merchandising. Franchising, McDonald's, huge retail chain. I can obtain a franchise for McDonald's. Natural ice cream. And the last form of commercialization is collateralization or securitization. What do I mean by that? Just like in real estate, you can create a mortgage and generate money, raise funds. Intellectual property also, you can create a charge and raise funds. Are there any statutory requirements that you must remember when you are getting into agreements? Yes. In respect of trademarks, copyrights, patents, and designs, the law specifically states that there must be an agreement in writing. Okay. So you must ensure that there is a written agreement. Insofar as patents and designs are concerned, there is a specific requirement that it has to be executed also. So not only written, but it has to be executed also. Insofar as trademarks are concerned, if you are licensing by virtue of a written agreement, the use by the licensee will be considered or deemed to be used by the owner of the mark. Similarly, if you register the license with the trademark office, which is not mandatory, but if you do so, then the registered user will also be entitled to sue for infringement. Otherwise, it is only the owner who can sue for infringement. Similarly, for copyrights, patents, and designs, if you are an exclusive licensee, you are entitled to initiate action in your own name, and the owner can be only added as a pro forma defendant. Now, I have purposely made this red, and there is one concept which I wanted to introduce to all of you. The concept of a sole license, an exclusive license, and a non-exclusive license. A sole license means that I am the owner of a particular intellectual property and I am only giving a license to one person, sole, only one. But that does not prevent me from also exploiting it independently. So I will also use my intellectual property, my licensee will also use the intellectual property. But there will be only one license, sole licensee. An exclusive licensee is also a sole licensee, but he also excludes me from using it. So it is an exclusive license. One person, I give a license, he will alone exploit it, and I will also not be as an owner entitled to exploit it. So only an exclusive licensee is given a right under the statute to sue in his own name. So a non-exclusive licensee or a sole licensee cannot sue for infringement. A non-exclusive licensee, as the name suggests, is there are several licensees. Two peculiar things that you must remember in the context of patents and designs. When you are granting a license in respect of a patent, you cannot force the licensee and say that you will not purchase any other product apart from my own product. So he should be free to purchase any other product also. And the second thing is, you cannot bundle it. What do I mean by bundling? I have this product, which is my patent license. I will give you a license for this only if you take this product as well. Bundling, not permitted. The same is the case for designs also. Now let's come to enforcements. I have not really got into what is trademark infringement, what is copyright infringement, what is patent infringement, because it's obvious. There are exclusive rights. Those are being violated, and therefore you go to court. What is the manner in which you can enforce your rights? So there are various ways. One is a civil action. The second is a criminal action. In a civil action, you have an action for infringement. What do I mean by infringement? If you have a registered right, then you sue for infringement. If you do not have a registered right, then you may have a common law action of passing off. A passing off action is predominant in the context of trademarks only. In respect of designs, there has been evolving jurisprudence. There has been a bit of up and down, but the present position is that even in the respect of designs, you are entitled to now sue for passing off. Passing off, as the name suggests, is that I pass off my products as those of another who is the rights owner. A criminal action is also possible in respect of certain intellectual properties. I'll come to the differences in a bit. The exploitation of a trademark can also be by way of usage as a domain name, tata.com, tatasky.com. Now, apart from a civil action and a criminal action, there is a uniform domain name resolution policy and an Indian domain name resolution policy under which you can initiate action. So the UDRP is in respect of the top level domain names, which is .com, .org, etc. And the INDRP talks about the .in domain names. Now, as I said, the trademark can be used as a domain name, can be used upon the product, and can be used as a corporate name also, Tata Chemicals Limited. So if someone else uses Tata Salts Limited, then there is a remedy under the Companies Act also, but there are slight limitations to that. You have to initiate your proceedings within a particular period of time, etc. You'll have to look at section 16 and you'll have the answer there. And the last part is arbitration in case of IP disputes, which I'll touch upon in a second. I've made a very quick table because I think we are kind of running out of time. And I will quickly demonstrate to you what all is possible where so that you get the landscape and what is preferred over what at what point of time. So in respect of all intellectual properties, you can initiate civil proceedings. As far as criminal proceedings, for designs and patent infringement, there is no criminal proceeding. In respect of trademarks, the law prescribes that you must take the opinion of the registrar or the trademark registry before you can initiate a trademark criminal proceeding, and the police normally insist on the owner obtaining the registrar's opinion as to whether the marks are infringing or not. As regards as initiation of the proceeding, I indicated to you that it is either the owner of the IP who can initiate a civil proceeding, or it can be a registered user for trademarks, or it can be an exclusive licensee for copyrights, patents, and designs. Insofar as criminal proceedings, in Maharashtra, there has been a judgment of Bharat Vasantlal where the court has held that if you are an investigator, for example, or if you are carrying on the commercial business of conducting proceedings on behalf of an IP rights owner, then you cannot initiate proceedings. Whereas in other states, that is permissible. So you can appoint a third party only for the purposes of initiating action on your behalf. What is the nature of the relief that you can get? So you are in a position to get a local commissioner to go and conduct a search and seizure in respect of civil proceedings, whereas in criminal proceedings, any police officer not below the rank of a sub-inspector can conduct search and seizure. So search and seizure remedy is available in both civil and criminal proceedings. Insofar as the nature of the remedy is concerned, which is most important in an IP infringement action, injunction and damages, that is possible only in civil proceedings, not in criminal proceedings. So if you are interested in stopping a large infringer, it is always desirable to go through a civil proceeding as opposed to a criminal proceeding. A criminal proceeding may be more suited in cases of probably fly-by-night operators at times where fear factor is more sufficient. But both the fear factor and the injunctive relief is possible through a civil proceeding, because a search and seizure happens with police assistance and you get an injunction. So civil proceedings may be more effective most of the times. Imprisonment is not possible in civil proceedings unless there is a contempt of the order. But in criminal proceedings, that is possible. And therefore, you'll have to weigh your pros and cons before you initiate action. While strategizing your litigation, you must bear in mind that your ownership is secured. Either you have your registrations in place or you have your contracts in place whereby the rights vest in you. When you are talking about patents, copyrights, manage your data well, keep records of having created the work, laboratory reports, etc. in respect of patents maybe, in respect of copyrights, date of creation is important. So you can email your work to yourself and create the record of the fact that you in fact created it and the fact that you created it on a particular date. Have your registered users, exclusive licensees in writing so that it is documented. As I said, the use by a registered user or a licensee inures to the benefit of the licensor only if there is a written agreement. So ensure that your agreements are in place. Should you issue a cease and desist notice? Not always. What is the downside of issuing a cease and desist notice? One thing is that where there are fly-by-night operators, they may just get rid of the products, dump it into the market, and when you go for a search and seizure, you will find nothing. Secondly, you cannot probably get ex parte reliefs because you've already given him notice. So what's the point of an ex parte relief? The third thing is where two multinationals are fighting or two giants are fighting, there is a possibility of a counterblast. What do I mean by a counterblast? I issue a notice, he files a cancellation proceeding against my registration. That can delay the process in respect of obtaining of interim reliefs. Choosing the battlefield is the last part. Where do you sue for infringement? The jurisdiction that you choose is very important. In the case of trademarks, copyrights, and geographical indications, I indicated to you that you can initiate action where the plaintiff resides and carries on business. And therefore, the choice of jurisdiction also becomes very important strategically. You are dragging the defendant to your jurisdiction. There are other factors also, but I think I am running out of time, so I will not really get into that. What are the nature of reliefs? Of course, your injunctions, ant and pillar order, which is your search and seizure. John Doe orders, very interesting concept. You are not aware of who's selling it. So you know that certain CDs are being sold in a particular market, but you don't know how many of such sellers are there or who these people are obtaining these CDs from. What is the actual source of these CDs which are going into a particular market, say. So there has been a concept of a John Doe order. Nowadays in India, they are mostly filed as Ashok Kumar applications. So the defendant is named as John Doe. You go and conduct the search and seizure pursuant to an injunction order and a search and seizure order granted by the court. And then ask for a disclosure from those defendants कि भाई ये माल कहाँ से आ रहा है? What is the source of the product? And then you amend the proceedings and add them as the proper defendants. Two other very important reliefs that you claim is disclosures. What is the amount of revenue that the defendant has made by violating your products? And then you can structure the valuation of your claim. Two very important new developments, if I may say so, are dynamic injunctions in the internet age. Delhi High Court has been very progressive on this count. What is a dynamic injunction? You will ask me. Now, a film is released. I go to the theater, I film, and I create a website, xyz.com, and I release the film on that. You go to court, get an injunction, xyz.com, injuncted. Tomorrow, I say xyz1.com and continue the injunction. Very simple way of doing it on the internet. So the court has come and to a very nice solution for this. And it has been derived from concepts which have been applied outside of India in the UTV case, where once there has been an injunction granted against a particular defendant, if he tries to circumvent it by these means, then subsequent violations by the same defendant to circumvent the order can be taken care of by these dynamic injunctions, which will apply to these subsequent violations also. The next one is safe harbor and intermediaries. So what are intermediaries? Intermediaries are, as the name suggests, parties which facilitate or provide platforms for two entities to interact. Amazon, for example. I place a product on Amazon for sale as a manufacturer. You as a purchaser purchase it. Amazon is only a platform. It has no control over what I am selling. I may be selling infringing products. I may be selling false Tata salt. And I'm not Tata Chemicals. You are purchasing it. Is Amazon responsible? This has taken a good amount of significance in a good amount of litigation in the recent past. The emerging position seems to be that intermediaries may not be responsible for these kind of actions unless they have specific control over the products which are being sold. A. And secondly, if the intermediary platform is, for example, selling its own products under its own brand also, then it is not an intermediary. The last topic for the day is arbitrability of IP disputes. This has also been an issue which has drawn a lot of attention in the recent past. The argument about right in rem versus a right in personam. A right in personam is a dispute inter se persons. It does not affect the world at large. A right in rem is a right which affects the world at large, which means an intellectual property right, I can use it to the exclusion of the world at large. So the exclusive right is there to be enforced against everyone. Now, the Supreme Court in the Ayasami case had given an arbiter dicta which said that intellectual property rights may not be arbitrable. However, the high courts in various proceedings have been faced with this issue in the recent past. And the emerging position seems to be that where there are purely contractual commercial disputes, these may be arbitrable. However, if the arbitrator is called upon to decide upon the existence of a right and goes to the root of the existence of the right, which thereby affects my ability to enforce the right against the world, then the question cannot be arbitrated. One last point which I must deal with is arbitration clauses. Should you have an arbitration clause in an IP related agreement or not? This question should be answered on the basis of where will your ultimate jurisdiction lie. Arbitration courts are not necessarily intellectual property judges or judges who have dealt with intellectual property matters. So that is one important consideration that you may want to have. Your jurisdiction for interim reliefs you may not be able to control because there may be a specific seat of arbitration and there are other rules which will then govern which court you can approach and which court you cannot approach. So there may be restrictions on where you can go. And if there is a challenge to the arbitrability based on the right in rem, right in personam argument, then your interim reliefs may also be delayed by virtue of the Section 8 application, which may be moved. Okay. So that's I think a brief outline of intellectual property rights for you. I hope I have been able to kind of share some of the knowledge that I have gained over a period of time.
Nishad sir,
Yeah.
it was an enlightening lecture, and it is very difficult to go through all the intellectual property rights in such a short span of time. But thanks to you that you made it look so easy, and the participants also are showed a lot of interest, and this is evident from the number of questions that are pouring in. So with your permission, can I go through the questions?
Oh yes, please.
Okay. So whether the title of a movie in an artistic work and copyright can be taken for the same?
Well, a title of a film will not be an artistic work. Okay, a title of a film, I understand whether copyright. So the question is really whether copyrights subsist in the title of a film, or what is the intellectual property right which subsists in the title of a film. A very interesting case which I was helping Harshad with in the recent past. Now, the answer to that is there are no copyrights in the title of the film. Okay. If you are in a position, however, to demonstrate and prove that the title of the film is unique and the film is, say, attained a cult status, so to say, like a Sholay, for example, and you're in a position to show that reputation and goodwill which is associated only with you as a producer, then you may be in a position to sustain an action for passing off. But there are specific decisions which have held that there are no copyrights in the title of a film.
Okay. So we'll go to the next question. A cartoon of an actor. Okay. So to use it, so do we require the permission of the actor himself, or it means does it involve any copyright in it?
Yeah.
Like
So it's a very good question, I think. This goes into a different sphere of rights, in addition to the rights which I described, and it is called a personality right. A personality right is available to people who have, become brands by themselves, if I may call them. Celebrity status hai. Unka khud ka reputation hai. They have their own goodwill in their marketability. So people are drawn by virtue of their presence. And that's what endorsement contracts are all about. You're in a position to influence the purchasing decisions of the public. Now, if I have to use it commercially, then I will require the permission of the actor, etc., because I'm exploiting his persona, his likeness, be it his speech method, his voice, his face, or just his mannerisms, for all you know. Okay. However, if I have to just sit and draw a caricature of him, then I will have a copyright in the caricature. But whether I'm able to commercially exploit it as a trademark, the answer is probably no. Because then I'm exploiting his personality rights, but the artistic work which I have generated, I will have copyrights independently in that. Now, the exploitation of those copyrights, there may be limitations, and there will be an interplay of personality rights. I hope I've made myself clear.
Yes, it's well explained. The complex, though being a complex answer. Okay, so we will go to the next question. How can a script of a movie be protected? The story of the movie.
Yes, again a good question. Copyrights as a subject, copyrights are not mandatory to be registered. Now there are so many works which are created day in, day out by people that it may not be practical to seek registration. Secondly, copyright enforceability does not depend upon registration. So the moment I create a particular work, I sit here, draw it, I sit here, write it, copyright subsists right away. Nothing else required to be done. What is problematic is to show that I am the author, A, I created it before you, B, and C, that you copied it. That is the problem when you are talking about scripts. And therefore, when I was talking, it is important to document and create your documentation and keep it handy. A, that you have created it yourself. So if you have handwritten it, you can just put it into, make a photocopy, put it into Lifafa and mail it to yourself. If you computerized it, ensure that your author name, etc. is there on the file, email it to yourself from your email address. So there's a date of creation attached to it. There's some amount of evidence that you created to show that you have created it. That's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it, though not necessarily a recognized registration, so to say, but there are these associations like the Film Writers Association, Script Writers Association, etc. Go ahead, do your registration with them. So that ultimately you want to exploit that script in some manner or form. It's going to be made available to the public in some manner or form. Fixing your right through a third party. So it's not just your word against someone else's, but there's a third party who also affirms to the fact that you created it on a particular date, whatever that may be. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, Sadhu, it's well explained, especially the date of creation. The small thing what you do, mail yourself. It
Yes.
just creates a date of creation. Sir.
Right.
Okay. So we'll go to the next question. It's a very easy question. I think, what are the government charges for registration of trademarks?
Oh, it's different for different intellectual properties. There are slabs also on the basis of whether you are an individual, whether you are a startup. So the government gives discounts to startups and individuals. But if you're not either of them, then it's 9,000 per mark per class.
Answer that time required or the days taken for the registration process.
Interesting question. I didn't really touch upon that. But nowadays, your registration process has become pretty fast. The IP offices have become pretty streamlined. A trademark can be made available to you within 8 months if there is no objection or opposition. So the timelines are such that within 1 month of filing your application, it is examined. Within 1 month, you are supposed to give a response to the examination report. Within a month or if there are no objections, it may proceed to advertisement. 4 months to oppose. If no one opposes, then the registration is in your hand. So if you kind of add it up, it's about 6 to 8 months. You can have a registration if you have a fantastic distinctive mark, which no one's used before.
Yes, sir. I understand. If there are objections, then it takes long.
It's like nowadays, any other litigation in India.
It takes around 1 year for a hearing to come nowadays.
That is right.
Yeah. Okay. So we will go to the next question. Is registration of artistic work mandatory?
No, registration of artistic work is not mandatory at all. So as I said, artistic work falls within the domain of copyrights. No registration required. However, if an artistic work is capable of being used as a trademark and you want to proceed and get a registration for that artistic work, then you have to first take an NOC from the trademark registry and only then apply for the copyright. What is the reason for this, you will ask me. Now, a copyright registration is a blanket registration. It is not restricted to a particular kind of goods or services, right? So then, if anyone uses it in respect of any other product, say, as a trademark, then you'll go after him and say, "Ye to mera copyright hai, bhai," right? So therefore, it is important for the trademark registry to confirm that no one has an artistic work which is identical or deceptively similar to that artistic work and has in fact used it as a trademark in respect of any product. Because after you get your copyright registration, you will claim an absolute monopoly on that artistic work being used in any manner or form. That's the overlap between trademark copyright that I was talking about.
Yes, sir. Sir, we'll go to the next question.
Yes.
It's about geographical indications. I think we had a very short slide. We didn't cover much.
Yes.
But the participant wants to know that how to apply for a GI. And just can you cover a little bit more of that?
Yes. So as I said, GIs, there are two aspects. One is that it has to signify that a particular product is associated in the minds of the consumer as originating from that particular territory or geographical area. Like I said, the Puneri Pagdi, it is associated with that area, right? Similarly, if you're talking about Rasagullas, immediately you think about West Bengal, Champagne, immediately you think about the area of France where sparkling wine is created. Now, there are specific individuals or specific persons or entities which have the skill and the art to create these products and they've traditionally been doing it for a long time, because of which reputation has attributed to that kind of a product. Kolhapuri Chapar is the best example in that sense, you know. So these people who are actually responsible, they have associations. So this association of people, for the protection of all these manufacturers of that particular product in that particular territory, can apply for that geographical indication. And then you can also apply for being an authorized user of that GI and then exploit it. And then there are, of course, rules under the Act which prescribes the form and the manner and all of that. So I'm not really getting into that in so much detail just now.
Okay, so we'll go quickly through the other questions also.
Yes.
People want to know about the color combination. I think is the Colgate and the Anchor, the litigation which went out. In short,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah, so colors as marks, you know, so as I said, marks is a very broad definition, right? So merely because you fall within the definition of a mark does not necessarily mean that you are capable of being registered as a trademark. So to qualify as a trademark, you must necessarily show that connection in the course of trade. And connection with whom and from whom? The consumer connects the mark to the origin of the products. And unless a color has been or has attained that amount of significance, a color may not be accorded protection. Now, if you remember, prior to Vodafone and Hutch, etc., we used to use Orange, which was the service provider, you know. So there was a huge controversy as to whether Orange could claim exclusive rights in the color orange. Now, therefore, I give you an example of the John Deere tractors also. That color, yellow and green, used in that particular format has become so associated exclusively with these tractors that if you see a tractor in green and yellow in that combination, you will think only of tractors originating from John Deere. So that is the level of association that you'll have to prove so as to claim rights.
Sir, actually we have lot of questions, but due to paucity of
sorry.
time we cannot go. I request all the participants to, to ask their question on a YouTube video, which is which we are going to upload in a few days, and I will try my best to get the answers from sir and reply on that platform, sir. But we'll take this last question. Does, if anyone finds a vaccine for COVID-19, so whether he may be allowed to register his patent for that? The last question for the day.
Yes, I don't see any embargo in seeking a patent for that. But how far will your exclusivity be maintained over a period of time? There will be various factors to that which will have to be kind of considered. You know, the concept of compulsory licensing, etc. The concept of public health and public importance, safety. All of these factors will come into the play. So it's not a yes/no answer as to whether a patent will necessarily be granted, or at the end of the day, whether it is going to be enforced in terms of the exclusivity that we look at for intellectual property rights. There's no yes/no answer for that, unfortunately.
Yes, the time will show that, sir. Sir, now I
Exactly.
just transfer to Harshad to say a few words, and then
Sure.
Advocate Tanuj will give a vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I personally, as well as on behalf of our association, thank you very much, Mr. Nadkarni, for accepting our invitation, coming here and sparing some precious time and giving us, updating our knowledge about intellectual property. I'm really
Thank you so much, Harsha.
I'm really thankful to you. Tanuj, please.
Yeah, it's thank you, Harshadji. Wonderfully it was a wonderfully absorbing session, I must say. And at the outset, I would like to thank Advocate Nishadji on behalf of the Bar Association of Maharera, as well as the RERA Practitioners Association of Pune, for this lucid discourse on the subject. The masterful explanation of the complex topic and the dissection of the nuts and bolts of this subject would really help the audiences and would probably inspire some of us to explore this field of law also. Now, I would also want to thank the President, the Secretary, and the office bearers of both Bar Association Maharera and Mahari and RERA Practitioners Association for organizing this wonderful session with such a luminary speaker who is himself an authority on this subject. I would also
You're being
like
very
to thank.
kind.
I would also like to thank the audiences in joining in this effort of knowledge sharing by the hosts. And I would now, it's over to Secretary of the Bar Association, Anil D'Souza, for appraising the audiences on the other lectures which are coming up in the days or weeks ahead.
As beautiful as the session was, so was your gratitude, Tanuj. It was very nice. In fact, Nishad sir, it was such a vast topic, right from the clothes you wear to the food that you eat, and you spoke about rasgullas and all that at around lunchtime. So that really intrigued our levels of interest. But it was remarkable that all these trademark copyright touches each and every part of our life. And personally, sir, I would like to comment on your style of presentation. I believe it was one of the most engaging, introspective, and a very detailed presentation. And you used the slides so well. You had a lovely framework and structure to your entire presentation. You took us through it very superfluously. So on a personal note, I am very grateful to your wonderful style of presentation, which made things so much more easier. I would also like to thank Harshad sir a lot, because Harshad sir is the one who really taking the trouble, he's the spine and the backbone and the framework of this association. And he really takes the trouble of getting wonderful speakers like you. And he proactively does all his tables in place for dates and times and coordinates all this wonderfully. And also Chetan and Abhijit, who are giving us the IT support. And so it's really a wonderful teamwork together, everyone achieved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And sir, today was one of the sessions where each and every slide was so interesting. I was hoping that the presentation would not end so fast, but it did. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.